recapping a wild pair of conference title games, breaking down the Eagles' defensive roster and needs, and reacting to the confirmed head coaching moves and the rumored hires. All that and more on today's episode of Chalk Talk. Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 41 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by The Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half. You can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'm riding solo today, but I've got a great show lined up for you. Today, we're going to review the Eagles' entire defense, break down and kind of tier the needs heading into the offseason. Not fully getting into the draft yet, but we'll be there soon. We're going to review the AFC and NFC title games and take a look at the coaching carousel. Now, you might have noticed I didn't say anything about previewing the Super Bowl. We're going to do that in a separate show next week. And so just a little bit of housekeeping up front. My plan is to do a Super Bowl preview show next week, and we'll have some Eagles stuff that I do in there, maybe my first official on-podcast mock draft. After the Super Bowl, we'll do a recap show from the Super Bowl, and then we're going to get fully into off-season content. I've got a lot of ideas going around. I want to do big boards at each position and kind of break down what you guys can be looking at for the draft. I'm going to have Mark joining me. I'm going to have Dibes and maybe some other guests joining me for those podcasts. I'd also like to take a look at like each division and look at the off-season ahead of each of the four teams in the division, maybe some target free agents and a mock draft there as a series that I go through. Maybe do some Football 101 content like I did last offseason. It's kind of up in the air. You guys let me know. Reach out to me on Twitter and let me know what you want to see, and I'm happy to accommodate some of that. So let's dive right into our Eagles defensive review. And so I've got a chart here. If you're listening on podcasts later, I will post this on Twitter. It's going to be a little small, but it'll give you something to look at instead of just having to listen to all the numbers probably. But if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this chart here. It's got not every player on the Eagles defense, but all the important players. If a player is bold, that means that they are a pending free agent, just so you know what these mean. So let's just start at the top. So at defensive end, the four players I have listed here are Brandon Graham, Derrick Barnett, Josh Sweat, and Ryan Carrigan. Derrick Barnett and Ryan Carrigan are both pending free agents. And so let's just start off with Brandon Graham. On the season, Brandon Graham had 2 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 QB hit, no sacks, and a 62.6 PFF grade. Now, it's notable Brandon Graham was injured in the second game of the year, so he missed the majority of the year with an Achilles injury. It did happen early in the year, so he should be able to come back, be 100% by the time we hit training camp. It is worrying that Brandon Graham is 33 years old and coming off such a major injury. Now, Graham is he's not a speed rusher. He never has been. He's more of a power guy. So even if it saps a little athleticism, it shouldn't really hurt him. It shouldn't hurt the tools that he uses in the pass rush. And so you should be a little nervous about Graham at 34 next year coming off of that injury. But this isn't like, he's some speed rusher. This would be a much bigger deal if it was Josh Sweat coming off of that injury. You could really tell this season that the defense suffered once Brandon Graham went out. They really struggled against the run. They struggled against the pass. There was just a lot of struggles on the defensive side of the ball, particularly with the pass rush, which we're going to get into in a moment. It might not have been as bad as people want to think. But Brandon Graham's coming back. He's going to be a starter. He's going to be heavily used in the rotation, and you just hope that he comes back well. Up next, we have Derrick Barnett. Now, Derrick Barnett is 25. He's coming off of his 5th-year option off of his rookie contract. He had 2 sacks this season, 46 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 11 QB hits with a 61.8 PFF grade. Now, Derrick Barnett, according to the ESPN pass rush win rate metrics, which means that you defeat your block in 2.5 seconds or faster, Derrick Barnett had the 7th highest pass rush win rate amongst all edge players. That might surprise you for a guy that only got 2 sacks, but Derrick Barnett's a guy that's caught a lot of criticism for his lack of productivity as an Eagle. And it's not unwarranted, nor is it unwarranted the criticism that he caught for his penchant to get dumb penalties in critical situations. That said, I do think Barnett has been a little bit better pass rusher and a very good run defender, but a better pass rusher than people realize because we're only looking at sacks. And the Eagles as a whole did not get a lot of sacks this year. I think Derrick Barnett walks in free agency. I don't think the Eagles are going to bring him back. I think his penchant for dumb penalties is ultimately going to outweigh any good from him. I do think that he could have success somewhere else, though. I think he could have success back in Philadelphia if he were to come back on a below-market deal. And there may not be a great market developed for Barnett just based off a team's stat sheet hunting, looking at those sacks, and the numbers are low. But right now, I would say that I think Derrick Barnett's going to be gone. And I think the Eagles are going to look to upgrade through free agency or definitely through the draft. Up next, we have Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat is 24. He got an extension done this year, so he is under contract long-term. This year, Sweat defensed 4 passes. He forced a fumble, 7.5 sacks, 13 QB hits, 45 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and he had a PFF grade of 76.1. Sweat is a guy that really seemed to come on as the year went along. He got more playing time this year than he ever has before. He started 13 games. He ranked 3rd among all edges in pass rush win rate, and it resulted in 7.5 sacks. This is a guy that could have easily had a double-digit sack year if the coverage behind had been a little bit better. And so I think Sweat is a potential building block at edge. I don't think he's going to be an elite edge, but I think he's going to be a very good defensive end for the Eagles for a long time. And then the 4th defensive end is Ryan Carrigan. Ryan Carrigan appeared in all 16 games. He ended the year with 3 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 2 QB hits. He had the lowest tackle number for any edge in the NFL that played 25% of his team's snaps. I don't think there's any debate here. Ryan Carrigan is gone, and he did nothing for the Eagles this year. And so that leaves the Eagles with only 2 really tried and tested defensive ends on their roster, and one of them is a 33-year-old coming off of an Achilles injury. I think edge is one of the top needs for this team as a whole, and definitely one of the biggest needs on the defense heading into the draft. Now let's take a look at the interior defensive line, where we have the trio of Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, and Milton Williams. Fletcher Cox is 31 years old. He played in all 16 games. He ended the year with 2 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 1 touchdown, and 3.5 sacks, which is not the amount of sacks you want for a player that is being paid as highly as he is. He had 35 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 12 QB hits, and a 66.7 PFF grade. Early in the year, Fletcher Cox was vocally frustrated with the Eagles and with Jonathan Gannon's defense. And to be honest, he looked like he was taking plays off. Now, down the year, it improved, his effort improved, and you saw him start to make an impact. But this is not the Fletcher Cox of old. This is a guy the Eagles probably should have traded a year ago. They should have sold high before he started to decline. Instead, they've restructured his contract. Cox will almost certainly be with the team next year because the dead cap for moving on from him is prohibitive. And he's still a good player. He's not an elite player. He's not justifying his salary, but he's a good player to have on your interior defensive line. Next to him was Javon Hargrave, who had a really good start to the year and then cooled off. He ended the year with 7.5 sacks. He had 1 pass defense, 1 forced fumble, 63 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, and 18 QB hits with a PFF grade of 67.1. Now, Javon Hargrave, early in the year, I think he benefited a lot from playing next to Fletcher Cox. I think as the year went along, people started to realize he might have been the bigger threat than Fletcher Cox, and they started to pay more attention to him. And then you started to see his limitations. So solid year from Javon Hargrave. He's a solid player moving forward. I don't think the Eagles have to be concerned about their interior defensive line, but they don't have the wreckers in the interior defensive line that they're accustomed to having when Cox was at the top of his game. And then they have the rookie, Milton Williams, 22 years old. He played both inside and he lined up at edge some this year. I think he's a versatile player. He played in all 17 games. He started 2 of them. He had 2 pass defense, 2 sacks, 30 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 6 QB hits. Now, PFF graded him with a grade of 49, which I think is low. And I've talked about PFF grades before. I don't think they're a great metric, but they are an easy way to just compare players to one another. I don't think he was as bad as PFF grades him out to be. I think he flashed and showed some potential. Overall, I think, if he had to play 40-50% of the snaps at interior defensive line next year, I think the Eagles would be fine. And so I don't think interior defensive line is a huge need, but it is a place they could look to add depth, especially with Fletcher Cox aging out. Moving on to the linebackers, we have Alex Singleton, TJ Edwards, Davion Taylor, and Janard Avery. Both Alex Singleton and Janard Avery are free agents, although Alex Singleton is a restricted free agent, which means the Eagles are basically going to have to pay him nothing to retain his rights. Alex Singleton led the team with 137 tackles. He had 4 tackles for loss, 2 QB hits. He did have a defensive touchdown. He had an interception, 4 passes defensed, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. PFF gave him a grade of a 52.3. Singleton is a guy that he's a tackle machine. He struggles a little bit in pass coverage. I think ideally this is a guy that you would want in on base downs. He can cover a little bit if you need him to, but he's not a guy that you want to have to be trotting out there to match up on tight ends or to match up, against running backs on a frequent basis. TJ Edwards, more of the same thing. He's a little bit younger at 25. He's also a tackle machine. He had 130 tackles. They were the only 2 Eagles defenders with over 30 or 100 tackles. 5 tackles for loss. He graded out very well from PFF, 76.3. Edwards is another guy. He's really good against the run. He's limited athletically, though. Like, if you could take TJ Edwards' awareness of the game, his savvy, and you could put it into Davion Taylor's body, it would be a great linebacker. He just lacks the athleticism. So another good, base down, run-stopping linebacker. But the Eagles are going to need somebody that can cover, which brings us to Davion Taylor, who played in 9 games. He started 6 games before he got hurt, had 41 tackles, and he had the lowest PFF grade among the Eagles' starting defensive players at a 38.6. Taylor is a guy that, coming out of the draft, he needed experience, and he hasn't really gotten the opportunity. He didn't play much as a rookie. He had his season cut short here. It's starting to get into a territory with Taylor. I said at the time he was drafted, Davion Taylor is the type of guy that's going to be a good player for some other team on his second contract. And that's what the trajectory is still on for him. He's very raw. He hasn't gotten the NFL reps he needs. This is not a guy that you can rely on. Next year, he showed a few flashes, but overall, he was a liability in pass coverage. His athleticism lets him make up some ground, but he's just too slow to process. And then you have Janard Avery, who is set to hit free agency. He had 1 sack, 43 tackles this year, graded out of 47.4 with PFF. I don't expect Janard Avery to come back next year. So the Eagles have a gaping hole at linebacker. They have to inject some talent. They need a linebacker who can cover, somebody with Davion Taylor's athleticism, but that actually understands what's happening in front of them. I think it's very possible you see the Eagles use a first or second round pick on a linebacker this year for the first time, and it feels like forever. Let's roll on to the defense here, or the secondary here. We have 4 corners we're going to talk about: Darius Slay, Steven Nelson, Avante Maddox, and Zach Mcpherson. Now, of the 4, only Steven Nelson is a pending free agent. I've heard talk of bringing him back. I think Steven Nelson is going to get a bigger deal somewhere else than the Eagles will want to pay him. And he played okay this year. He was a fine CB2, played in all 16 games, had an interception. He had 7 pass breakups, 50 tackles, a 61.5 PFF grade. He was definitely the 3rd best corner for the Eagles. That's not the type of guy that you go pay a lot of money for, especially at 28 years old. Darius Slay had a resurgent year, maybe one of the better years of his career. He had 3 interceptions, 1 touchdown, 9 pass breakups, 2 fumble recoveries, and both of those went for touchdowns. So Darius Slay had 3 touchdowns this year. He gets an 81.3 PFF grade, the highest grade given to any Eagles defender. Now Slay is here for the next couple of years. He is at 30. You have to wonder about him starting to fall off, but for now he's your CB1. The Eagles would be well served to go get a CB2 in the draft, somebody that can play outside. It is a good year for that. There's a lot of corner targets that we're going to start to look at. I think the Eagles will definitely take a cornerback in the first round of the draft. Avante Maddox is our third corner we're going to look at. He's 25 years old. He also got an extension done, played in 16 games this year. He had an interception. He had 9 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles, and he had a 72.8 PFF grade. This was my candidate before the year to be a breakout for the Eagles this season because he finally got the opportunity to play in the slot. This guy was always meant to be a slot corner. The Eagles had him trying to play outside because they just didn't have anybody else, and he looked really bad doing it. They moved him into the slot, and he had the best year of his career. I'm excited about Maddox long-term in the slot. I think that position is taken care of. What the Eagles need is outside corners now, and that's what I would look for them to focus on through the draft. And the reason they're not going to look for slot corners is because they already have so many. Avante Maddox is proven. They spent a 4th-rounder on Zach Mcpherson, who did appear in all 16 games. He had a 64.2 PFF grade. He didn't look great, but he was a 4th-round rookie pick. They also have guys like Josiah Scott and Tay Gowan that are also that slot mold. The Eagles do not need another slot cornerback. They need to go looking for outside corners only in the draft. And then we go to safety. The Eagles have 4 safeties we'll look at: Rodney McLeod and Anthony Harris, who are both free agents, and then Marcus Epps and Kavon Wallace. Out of Rodney McLeod and Anthony Harris, they both, according to PFF, played about the same this year. Rodney McLeod a 63.7 grade, Anthony Harris a 61.6 grade. Neither one of them really shone out. I think either of them is fine. You would rather have a better playmaker at one of those positions, though. I do think the Eagles will keep one of them. Which one, I'm not sure. I would lean towards saying they will keep Rodney McLeod because he's been there longer, and he just seems like a guy that's going to retire as an Eagle. But I think the Eagles will keep one of those, and then I think they need to look to address safety in the offseason. Marcus Epps had a surprisingly good year. He had a 72.8 PFF grade. He had 62 tackles. There's several clips I have out on there of Twitter of him laying big hits. He's kind of a run stopper, a hard-hitting safety. He's kind of your ideal safety 3, but they need a playmaking safety. Whichever of Harris and McLeod they keep can be your safety 2, but they need a playmaker from the draft. Unfortunately, Kyle Hamilton's going to be off the table, but there's other guys that we'll talk about, Jaquan Brisker, people like that they could target in the first or the second round to make an impact on this defense. And then you have Kavon Wallace, who everyone was excited about when he was drafted out of Clemson. He's just never really panned out. He's had multiple opportunities to get on the field. He's just never been able to take advantage of them. Appeared in 13 games this year, only has 15 tackles and a PFF grade of 56.1. And so if I was going to tier the Eagles' needs on defense, I would say that their number one need is a defensive back. Now, you could go outside corner, you could go safety. I would say safety is a bigger need, but those are both definite needs. And then I would say edge. And I know the linebacker people are going to be mad at me. I just don't view linebackers as big of a need as safety and cornerback. I think the Eagles, I'd be excited if they draft a linebacker, but there's 5 things I'm convinced the Eagles need to draft early. They need an edge, they need a linebacker, they need a corner, a safety, and a receiver. They've got 3 first-rounders and a second-rounder. So you can only get 4 of those. I would look to get a linebacker out of free agency. You can get guys that are better than what you have that would contribute there. And we'll break this down as we get more into the draft, but that's kind of what I see right here as the Eagles' needs moving forward. So you guys let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you guys about how you would rank the Eagles' needs. And as we get into draft stuff, we'll certainly try to talk some more about that. So now let's move on to our conference title game reviews. So first up, we have the Cincinnati Bengals against the Kansas City Chiefs in a game that went to overtime because, of course, it did. Let me blow this up so you can see it. Joe Burrow goes 23 of 38 for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He takes 1 sack, which has got to feel like a great day at the office for him after taking 9 sacks the week before. Patrick Mahomes goes 26 of 39 for 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and he was sacked 4 times. T. Higgins goes over 100 yards. He's the only receiver to do so, as the Chiefs largely held Jamar Chase in check. And so as I watched this game, I couldn't help but be reminded of Week 17. In Week 17, Cincinnati fell behind 14-0, and then they rallied to win 34-31 on a game-winning field goal on the last play of the game. This week, they fell behind 21-3, and then they rallied to win 27-24 in overtime on a field goal on the last play of the game. Now, Joe Burrow, I mentioned he only took 1 sack on the day. It was not because the offensive line played better. The offensive line was atrocious, but there were just multiple times that defenders had him in their grasp and they couldn't bring him down, and he was able to get out and make a play. Got a couple comments here coming in from YouTube that I missed earlier. Sorry about that, guys. Derpy Gaming says hello. Pedro says, hey, Shane, how are you? First things first, in prior of these topics, how do you see the Eagles defense taking into account possible head coaching position for Gannon and Houston? Let me address that and we'll get back to the review. And thanks for chiming in again, Pedro. Always here in the chat, and I always appreciate your questions. It's never ideal to have turnover, especially after a year, because every time you bring in a new coach, you bring in new philosophy and new schemes. Even just going from Schwartz to Gannon, you saw a guy like Fletcher Cox be frustrated with the offense and the defense and the different things he was being asked to do. And so it's not ideal, but it is good in a sense that I just don't think Gannon's scheme is viable against good quarterbacks. Gannon runs a lot of spot drop coverages, zone coverages, where linebackers just hit a landmark and they cover an area, and that just doesn't really work. You need to utilize pattern matching. You need to do some of those things, and I just don't think – now maybe it's a limitation of personnel. The Eagles certainly didn't have good linebackers, and I don't think Gannon got to do everything that he wanted to do with this team. But that said, if the guy is already getting coaching interviews, and he strikes me as a guy who can articulate well in interviews. So if he's already getting interviews, if he's going to go somewhere else, I would rather him go now than in a year or two. Let's just get a new guy in that you can start to develop their scheme. The Eagles are going to expend significant draft capital this offseason into their defense. I would rather them do it for a guy to fit a guy's scheme that's going to be here long-term than a guy that might just leave next year. And so I'm pulling personally for Gannon to get a job somewhere, not because I think he's awful, just because, I mean, I wasn't a huge fan, but I think he's going to be gone in the next year or two, and I would rather just get in a guy that's going to stay. Another frequent listener, Joe Ciccoletti, chiming in on YouTube says, Shane, back at it. Where's Mark? Mark wasn't able to make it today. We'll get him on here next week, though, for our Super Bowl preview. Especially, we'll give you guys a lot of Super Bowl prop bets and things like that. Great game plan defensively in the second half for the Bengals, and a costly drop of an interception for San Francisco cost them a chance for a Super Bowl. Kudos to the Rams and Stafford. And yeah, we're going to get into that. So to segue back into the Bengals game, the Bengals offensive line did not play better. Burrow only took 1 sack because he's superhuman. He becomes only the third quarterback with multiple game-winning drives in the same postseason. Tom Brady is one of the other two in 2001. Kurt Warner also in 1999. Both of those guys won a Super Bowl that year. And so Joe Burrow has a chance to become the third quarterback to do that in 2 weeks against the Rams. And Joe mentioned the adjustments in the second half for the Bengals, and I think that's spot on. Like Kansas City's first 4 possessions went 84, 75, 72, and 80 yards. Their first 5 possessions of the second half went for a total of 34 yards. In my opinion, they got a little complacent. They got a little content. They had too many early down runs. Mahomes fell out of rhythm. I saw somebody say on Twitter that the only way to beat the Chiefs is to let them think they've already won. And that certainly seemed to work for the Bengals as the Chiefs just fell off, got sloppy, and then couldn't get going again. Now, not to discredit the Bengals defense, they played lights out after they stumbled out of the gate. And it's really impressive when you look at their roster. They don't have a star player, right? I mean, they got Jesse Bates is good, but they don't have the star power that, say, the Rams do with Donald and Ramsey and Von Miller. But their unit as a whole plays really well together. They are more than the sum of their parts. In this particular game, they had a lot of 3-man rushes, 35% of dropbacks. They only rushed 3 at Mahomes, and just nobody could get open. Mahomes went 7 of 13 for 59 yards, 1 interception, and 2 sacks on those plays. And so it was an effective strategy for the Bengals. It was not one that worked early in the game, but they weathered the storm and it worked out. They got Mahomes out of rhythm. And critically, they held Tyreek Hill to no catches in the second half. Defensively, I felt like the Chiefs really focused on Jamar Chase, and they held him at like 60 yards, but T. Higgins was a big beneficiary. He had 108 yards. And it just goes to prove you really need 2 to 3 really good receivers to succeed. I mean, the Bengals have Higgins, they have Chase, they have Tyler Boyd, and that's enough. For Kansas City, they had Tyreek Hill and Jason Kelce. But outside of that, or not Jason Kelce, Travis Kelce. Outside of that, who are you concerned about? And, if you can take away 2 guys and your offense falls apart, that's not ideal. And it's something worth remembering for the Eagles, as they have Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. Who is their third option? They don't really have one. I feel like you need 3 good passing targets to succeed. I would not be surprised to see the Chiefs target a receiver in the draft in a couple of months. As an Eagles fan watching this game, though, I couldn't help but feel like this is the same old Andy Reid. Andy Reid is a great coach until he gets to title games. And I thought a lot of this loss was on Andy Reid. I mean, you had the ball on the 1-yard line before halftime. You get no points because you dialed up a throw behind the line of scrimmage with no timeouts. It doesn't make sense. He got too conservative in the second half. He put the brakes on an offense that was grinding through. There's just chewing up the Bengals defense. And so there's plenty of blame to go around. Certainly Patrick Mahomes looked terrible. It was probably the worst half of football of his career. And I think Andy Reid contributed to that. So the blame goes on both of them, just like the credit would go to both if they won. As for the Bengals became the first team to ever overcome a double-digit halftime point deficit against in a season. And so they did it in Week 17. They did it again in the playoffs. It's just crazy how they were able to come back. And so we will see the Bengals, who came into this season having not won a playoff game in 31 years, in the Super Bowl. And I'm not going to lie, it just feels weird. Joe Burrow, I said this on Twitter, Joe Burrow is who everyone thought Baker Mayfield was going to be. A number 1 overall pick from a fancy college program that's got a lot of swagger and was supposed to bring hope and bring a title to a title-deprived town in Ohio. Well, Baker Mayfield may not have panned out, as we've talked about on this podcast, but Joe Burrow is the real deal. And he has the Bengals this close to winning a Super Bowl title. Now let's flip over to the 49ers and the Rams. For a third matchup this season, Jimmy Garoppolo goes 16 of 30 for 232 yards and 2 touchdowns with 1 sack. Matthew Stafford, 31 of 45 for 337 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Neither team got much going by way of a running game. And then the difference in the passing game, other than the quarterbacks, was just the twofold threat of Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham, who both went over 100 yards. Cooper Kupp goes for 142 and 2 touchdowns. And so, this game was crazy as well. At the end of the game, you've got Jimmy Garoppolo. He just goes full Carson Wentz with a shovel pass interception under duress. But the game was probably over before that. And so the Rams will now get to play in their home stadium in the Super Bowl. This has happened 2 times in NFL history, and the other was last year when the Buccaneers got to win the Super Bowl in their home stadium. And to be honest, I don't like that. No team should be able to play the Super Bowl in their home stadium. I think the NFL should just put the Super Bowl every year in the Dallas Cowboys stadium. I mean, it's the nicest stadium in the league, and you don't have to worry about the Cowboys ever getting to the Super Bowl. So it makes sense to me. NFL just put the Super Bowl in Dallas every year. Nice amenities. Don't have to worry about the home field advantage. But as we roll on, as Joe mentioned, and if you guys are watching here live, you can drop us comments. We'll throw them up on the screen here. We love to interact with you guys. But Jaquiski Tartt dropping that interception on the Matthew Stafford just horrendous throw, that was killer. I don't know if you guys saw this clip. Go look it up. It's just nobody's even there except him, and he dropped it. And it's just the epitome of a that's why you play defense moment. The Rams went on to score a field goal to tie that game after that dropped interception. The 49ers go 3 and out, and then the Rams march down the field to take the lead, and then you cue up the Jimmy G under duress shovel pass interception. In the game, as I mentioned, Odell Beckham Jr. had 9 receptions for 113 yards. That helped take the pressure off of Cooper Kupp to do everything, and that's exactly what the Rams wanted when they went and signed this guy. And, they wanted him to be a third guy next to Robert Woods, and then Robert Woods gets hurt, but Odell Beckham has been able to step up here. So good for him. Good for Matthew Stafford to get to a Super Bowl after, being a number 1 pick, playing better than people realized in Detroit for a lot of years, but being hamstrung by the Lions. I'm happy for him that he gets the chance to go to a Super Bowl. For Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers, I feel like that last pass is just a perfect cap of his career in San Francisco, a guy that could do enough to get you close to where you wanted to go. And then he just has those inexplicable throws that keep you from achieving your goals. In this postseason, Jimmy Garoppolo completed 58% of his passes for 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions and a QBR of 51.9. The biggest thing that 49ers fans really have to regret is if they had just seen that, if they'd had the foresight to see Jimmy G was a liability and trade 3 first-round picks to go get a quarterback in the last draft. If they had just done that, that maybe they're in the Super Bowl. But, hindsight's 20/20, right? Pedro asked, do you think this loss was because of Shanahan? Without Mark here to defend his guy Shanahan, I think Kyle Shanahan is a really good coach who makes some really questionable decisions. And I questioned it at the time. I've questioned it all year that they were playing Jimmy Garoppolo instead of Trey Lance. Now, if Trey Lance just looks so bad in practice, then okay, maybe that's a scouting issue and maybe you shouldn't have traded up for him. But I just don't understand. Like, you've seen everything that Jimmy G is. Jimmy G is the type of guy that everything has to go right. You have to have a running game. Your defense has to play lights out. Jimmy G is not going to win you very many games. And against the Rams, the 49ers couldn't run the ball. Their defense was good, not great, and you saw it cost them. I'm not going to say this loss was Shanahan's fault, but I will say his offense that traded up to get a quarterback they didn't play, his offense did not do enough to win this game. The DeMeco Ryans defense was not the issue. The issue was the offense, and Shanahan is the genius behind the offense. And you can't claim being hamstrung by your quarterback when you invested what they invested to go get a guy and then not play him. And so I'd be curious to hear Mark's take about that. But from where I sit, I would go all the way back to week 6, 7, 8 when they made the decision to not start playing Trey Lance as what ultimately lost them this game. So, and it really stinks for 49ers fans because, maybe they don't make the playoffs if they play Lance all season, but now you're sitting in a place where Jimmy G is going to be gone, and you sit here this whole offseason and you wonder, well, is Trey Lance the guy? Because he couldn't beat out Jimmy G, who couldn't get it done, and now we've wasted a year of Trey Lance's rookie contract, and we don't even know what he's going to look like in games. And so for me, it's a no-brainer to play the rookie in that situation, but I'm not the guy that's out here coaching for my job. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I'm going to point a finger at him, but I'm not going to point all the blame at him because I think Jimmy G was just dreadful all postseason. Okay, and then on the other side, you've got Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. They become only the second quarterback wide receiver duo with 20 touchdowns in their first season together. The only other duo to do that was Tom Brady and Randy Moss in 2007 when Tom Brady threw the 50 touchdown passes in that season. So we are a week and a half away from the Rams against the Bengals in the Super Bowl, which doesn't feel like a real thing. That doesn't feel like a real matchup. I mean, the Rams could never get by the 49ers. The Bengals never even get to the playoffs. And yet here we are. I am excited to see it being some new teams. I would say the teams that I rooted for won. I like Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, but a little bit of KC fatigue. I wanted to see the Bengals get their shot. And then on the other side, the 49ers have been in a Super Bowl recently, and I didn't really want to root for Shanahan, although I don't really want to root for McVay either. So I will be pulling for the Bengals in the Super Bowl. We will talk next week about if I think they can actually win or not. Okay, let's throw it over to the last thing that we were going to cover today, and that is the NFL coaching hires and the coaching carousel. So we're going to go through, I'm going to name some of the hires that have been made, and then for the positions that there have not been hires, I'm going to talk about who's got the second interviews and things like that. And And we'll just kind of break it down that way. Joe says on YouTube, Ramsey versus Chase is one of the matchups I'm looking forward to the most. If Chase gets over 100 yards and a few catches, does he get into that top 5 wide receiver category next year? I think it's certainly possible. He had an outstanding rookie year, and you think about, the top receivers in the league. I think you have to do it for more than a year to be able to get into that conversation, because a lot of people have a breakout year. It's more prevalent with quarterbacks that somebody will have a good year and then you get film on them, but it happens with wide receivers too. And so we'll see how people adjust to Chase next year. But he's sort of that epitome of, even when he's not open, he's open, just throwing the ball, and you can trust him to go make a play. And so I think, a couple of years from now, are we talking about Chase as a consensus top 5 receiver? If he continues at this pace, absolutely. I am excited to see him against Ramsey and to see how Raheem Morris and that defense kind of adjust to this, because, the Bengals just showed that, well, if you dedicate everything to shutting him down, Tyler Boyd could go off, T. Higgins could go off. And so you could make an argument that maybe you put Ramsey on, instead of putting Ramsey on Chase, maybe you put him on Higgins and then you double team Chase, because you're certainly not going to use Ramsey in a double team. There's a lot of things, a lot of chess match that can go on here. I am really excited to see how they're going to do that. Pedro says the Bengals is super fun. I agree. I'm going to be pulling for them to win it just because it's been so long. It'd be really cool if, they went from number 1 pick to Super Bowl champion in 2 seasons. That would be a pretty phenomenal storyline. Now the Bengals are on the newspaper headlines here in Brazil due to Anita's interview on Jimmy Fallon. She's dating Tyler Boyd. That's great. So Pedro all the way from Brazil listening to us, and the Bengals are in the headlines there. So big day for the Bengals, worldwide fame and acclaim with their Super Bowl title run here, hopefully. So, okay, let's dig into these coaching hires. Up first, we have the Chicago Bears. They have made their move. They have hired Matt Eberflus to be their head coach. They hired Luke Getsy to be their offensive coordinator. He was formerly the Green Bay Packers quarterback coach. And so you look at the hires here, they bring in Getsy, a guy who's worked with Aaron Rodgers, to be the offensive coordinator and hopefully to develop Justin Fields. And they bring in Eberflus, a guy with a proven defense. He likes to run those 2 high schemes into Chicago for the defense. I personally don't typically like defensive-minded head coach hires. I called this hire when it happened on Twitter a terrible hire, and I got some pushback on that. But let me tell you why. When you have a rookie quarterback, or Justin Fields will be a second-year quarterback, everything has to be about developing him. And I don't see how hiring a defensive head coach helps you with that. I think you should have made an offensive hire. And yeah, they get Luke Getsy to be their offensive coordinator. But here's the thing is, if he's good, he's going to be gone in a couple of years. He's going to be a head coach somewhere else. You have a new system. Good offensive coordinators are going to get hired away to be head coaches. That's why I'm such a fan. Quarterback is the most important thing. Offense wins in today's NFL. The rules are slanted to offense, everything. That's why I'm almost always in favor of an offensive-minded head coach, because then that guy's not going to get poached. And so will Eberflus do a good job with that defense? Probably. Will Getsy do a good job with Justin Fields in the offense? Maybe. I don't know. How much coaching did Aaron Rodgers need over the last couple of years? And so, we'll see how it plays out. My initial thought is that I do not like the hire, though. I would definitely have rather seen them go with an offensive guy. Going on to Denver, Denver hired Nathaniel Hackett to be their head coach. He is the Packers' offensive coordinator, which brings in some interesting storylines, because previously Aaron Rodgers had said that, he really likes Hackett. If Hackett went somewhere, he wanted to go somewhere, and that sort of thing. So it sets up a potential Green Bay Denver trade to send Aaron Rodgers to Denver, which is really intriguing, right? Denver has a lot of weapons. They had a really good defense. Now they've traded Von Miller, but they've got a good defense. They've got a lot of receiving weapons. Imagine if they got Aaron Rodgers in there, which I'm sure they hired Hackett because he interviewed well, but in the back of their mind, they hired Hackett wanting to make a play for Aaron Rodgers. If you could get Aaron Rodgers, just think about the quarterbacks in that division. You'd have Aaron Rodgers in Denver with those weapons, Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City with his weapons. You got Justin Herbert, a guy I'm huge on in Los Angeles, with their weapons. And then you've got Derek Carr, maybe not, in Las Vegas. Derek Carr is a good quarterback. He's easily would be the worst quarterback in that division, though, which would be a lot of fun to watch. So the AFC West would be really fun to watch if this happens, not that it isn't already. Moving on to another team in that division, the Raiders brought in Josh McDaniels to be their head coach. I don't like this hire. I don't understand why people continue to go to Patriots assistants. Patriots assistants don't succeed. They come in with this arrogance and this Belichickian attitude, even though they are not Belichick. They haven't accomplished anything, and it alienates people. And you've seen it time and time again. You've seen Patriot assistant after Patriot assistant fail. You've seen Josh McDaniels go to Denver, where he made an incredibly bad decision drafting Tim Tebow in the first round. And he was there for a little bit, and then he lost his job, and he went back to New England with his tail tucked between his legs. And then he did the thing with the Colts where he accepted the job and then he backed out. I don't understand why you would hire this guy. I think he's a good offensive coordinator under Belichick. I think as a head coach, he has struggled. Now, maybe he learned from Denver. Maybe it'll work out for the Raiders. It's certainly a splashy hire, but I really don't like it. Moving on, we've got the New York Giants hiring Brian Dabel. I always forget how you say his last name, to be the head coach. He came from Buffalo. He's the offensive coordinator. He's gotten a lot of credit for his work with Josh Allen. I really like this hire. He was one of my top candidates. I'm sad as an Eagles fan that the Giants got him. I do not think he's going to be able to make much out of Daniel Jones. I don't think Daniel Jones is a very good quarterback, but I think if anybody can make it work, he could. I think more than likely, though, he's going to be getting to pick a quarterback in a year or two and to groom that guy from his rookie season. Pedro says Vikings just announced Michigan's Harbaugh as their head coach. I had not heard that. I heard it was imminent and heavily rumored. And so if true, if that ends up coming out, that would make Jim Harbaugh the guy. They had interviewed Raheem Morris and Kevin O'Connell, the Rams' defensive and offensive coordinators, twice. They had a second interview pending with Patrick Graham, the Giants' defensive coordinator. Harbaugh, we'll see how it works out. He's been off and on at Michigan. He's kind of had an up and down career. Overall, I think I like that hire. I'll have to look into that a little more, though. For the Houston Texans, they have had a second interview with Brian Flores, Jonathan Gannon, Josh McCown, and Kevin O'Connell, again, the Rams offensive coordinator. It's starting to come out that it looks like Jonathan Gannon might be their head coach guy and Josh McCown might be their offensive coordinator. If so, I don't particularly like either move. Jonathan Gannon, I guess, again, I don't want to hire a defensive head coach. I just don't really like that, especially one that's only been a defensive coordinator 1 year in Jonathan Gannon and a guy that I didn't think did that great of a job. And then Josh McCown, I love him. I think he's going to be a good coach. I just don't think you give a guy an offensive coordinator job as his first job. Like, he needs to go be a QB coach, go be a wide receivers coach. You know, he got a lot of credit for working with the Eagles wide receivers, but maybe that works out. He was, kind of around that program a lot. So we'll see if that's how that ends up playing out, but we're still waiting on them. The Jacksonville Jaguars have a second interview pending for Byron Leftwich and Doug Peterson. And they want to interview Kevin O'Connell, the Rams offensive coordinator, but they can't because they missed getting their request in time. And so they have to wait till after the Super Bowl. And so the Jags, it's just another laughable mishap that there's a guy they want to interview, but they didn't do the paperwork in time, and so they have to wait. I've talked before, I love Doug Peterson to Jacksonville. I don't think Doug Peterson is like a top 5, top 10 coach, but I think he is a player's coach. I think he's really good at instilling a culture, and he's good at working with quarterbacks. And I think he would be a great fit for, the post-Urban Meyer world in Jacksonville. So I want Doug Peterson to go there to work with Trevor Lawrence. I think that's more of a long shot, though. I think they're going to make a play for O'Connell. Pedro asked, do you want Gannon out of Philly? I do. I'm not going to be really upset if he's back. I think he was limited by personnel this year. But I do think if he's getting serious head coaching traction now, he would probably be gone in a year or two. And the Eagles are set to make significant capital investments into their defense this year. They may spend 3 first-round picks on the defense. And every time you get a new guy, the schemes change, what you want in players change. I would rather them get a guy that's going to be here for more than another year or two to help with those picks. So I would like to see Gannon gone if he's going to go. I won't be disappointed if Houston hires him. I'd love to get a guy like Vic Fangio or who's the Ravens defensive coordinator that got fired. I can't remember the guy's name now. It's slipping my mind, but I'd love to go get one of those guys, one of those proven defensive coordinators. Wink Martindale. But I'd really love Fangio because, he's already kind of got his shot as a head coach, and he didn't make it, and he's a really good defensive coordinator. But I think that Fangio is probably headed to Minnesota to work with Harbaugh, so that's probably not on the table. Rolling on, we've got Miami. They have interviewed Mike McDaniel, the 49ers offensive coordinator, and Kellen Moore, the Cowboys offensive coordinator. Those are both considered finalists. If I was going to pick out of that, I'd rather take McDaniel than Moore. I was really kind of turned off to Moore by how the Cowboys played down the stretch, particularly in their playoff game. Whereas Mike McDaniel, he's got the Shanahan tree, which people want. I would give the better odds to him there. We already talked about Minnesota with the expected announcement of Harbaugh as head coach and Fangio as defensive coordinator. So that leaves us with the New Orleans Saints as the only opening. As Sean Payton basically looked at the salary cap and was like, you know what? We're in salary cap hell. I think I'm just going to take a year off. I fully expect Sean Payton to be back coaching in a year or two. I just think he wanted nothing to do with the purgatory that the Saints are headed towards. And so they've had no second interviews yet. We'll see that's not going to be a very desirable job. So that's going to wrap up the coaching news. My final thoughts, I was already going to talk about this, but Joe Ciccoletti asked, what's your take on the Washington Commanders? I think the Washington Commanders sounds like the name of a football team in a movie that didn't have a big enough budget to license an actual NFL team. I think it's kind of corny. I think the logo, I didn't really like how they kind of outlined all the W, and the uniforms looked a little, cartoonish. I feel like it's hit or miss every time. Well, it's mostly miss. Every time somebody rebrands, I feel like everybody hates it. And I'm trying not to overreact to it, but I don't really like the name. To be honest, I prefer the Washington football team. I kind of liked their aesthetic on their jerseys. And I think there was better concept stuff out there. So we'll see. Personally, I'm not a fan. And from what I've seen around, not many people were. But we'll see if the fan base kind of latches onto it. So Washington Commanders is a thumbs down for me. But I did see that they were going out and handing out gear right after they announced it, which, by the way, how do you let it leak out? I don't understand how they let that leak out. And then they released their hype video at 7 a.m. this morning or something. And I don't know, just felt like they kind of botched that, but that's fine. Ultimately, it doesn't matter down the road. The biggest thing is that now on a podcast, I'm going to have to start referring to them as the Washington Commanders instead of the Washington football team. And it took me almost an entire season to stop calling them the Redskins. So going to be a tough journey for podcasters. You guys will just have to chime in on the comments and let us know when we miss it, because we're definitely going to. So that's going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys, especially those of you that were here live, for joining us for episode 41 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, be sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. At me on Twitter, or my DMs are open. Let me know what kind of off-season content that you guys want. I laid out some ideas I had in the opener, but I'd love to hear from you guys. What kind of content will keep you engaged? What will help you get ready for the draft and get you through the off-season? Because right around the corner, the gloom of waking up post-Super Bowl is only a week and a half away. For me, I get super psyched about the draft, and so I'll be ready to go for that. But it's like when I wake up the day after the final day of the draft, you're just in that dumps because there's no football for months. We're going to fill that. We're going to fill it with football talk here. You guys let me know what you want to hear. I'm at _TPL on Twitter. My DMs are always open. And so for me, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.